The bridge of the starship Vengeance had seen better days. Hell, everything in the Human Defense Coalition had seen better days. Admiral Marcus Thorne stood before the cracked viewport, watching the debris field that used to be the proud colony of New Geneva drift past like cosmic ash. 3 million souls, gone in less than an hour. Sir, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen's voice cut through the silence, her usually steady tone betraying the tremor of barely controlled fear. Long-range sensors are picking up movement in the Kepler sector. It's massive. Thorne didn't turn around. At 62, he'd seen enough horrors to know that looking wouldn't make them any less real. The architects had been systematically dismantling human colonies for 6 months now, always striking where defenses were weakest, always leaving nothing but twisted metal and silence. How massive, he asked, his weathered hands clasped behind his back. 15 kilometers long, sir. Maybe more. The readings are inconsistent. Like it's phase shifting between dimensions. Phase shifting. The term that had become synonymous with humanity's approaching extinction. The architects didn't just travel through space, they rewrote it, folded it, made it bow to their incomprehensible will. And humanity, with all their railguns and fusion missiles, might as well have been throwing rocks at gods. Thorne finally turned, his steel-gray eyes scanning the bridge crew. Young faces, most of them. Kids who'd signed up to explore the stars and instead found themselves witnessing the methodical erasure of their species. Chen, bring up the tactical display. Show me everything we know about these things. The holographic projector flickered to life, casting eerie blue light across the darkened bridge. The image that materialized was enough to make seasoned veterans weep, a three-dimensional map of human space, once dotted with green markers indicating thriving colonies. Now, most of those markers pulsed red, destroyed, abandoned, or simply, gone. 47 colonies in 6 months, reported Chief Tactical Officer Rodriguez, his scarred face grim. Always the same pattern. They arrive, they scan, they harvest something. Then they move on, leaving nothing but debris. Harvest what? Thorne demanded, though he suspected he didn't want to know the answer. Rodriguez hesitated. Intelligence thinks, consciousness, sir. Brain patterns. The dead we've recovered, their neural pathways are empty. Scrubbed clean. The bridge fell silent except for the low hum of life support systems. Somewhere in the distance, a loose panel rattled with each pulse of the engines. The Vengeance was humanity's last heavy cruiser, the final remnant of what had once been a proud fleet. And if the architects found them? Sir. Communications Officer Park's voice cracked like a whip. Priority transmission from Earth Command. It's Admiral Morrison, sir. Thorne's jaw tightened. Morrison. The man who'd called him a relic of a bygone era, during the budget hearings last year. The man who'd insisted that humanity's future lay in diplomacy, not military strength. Put him through. The hologram shifted, revealing Morrison's haggard face. The man looked like he'd aged a decade in the past week. Marcus, he said, and the use of Thorne's first name spoke volumes about their desperate situation. Thank God you're alive. What's left of me, Thorne replied curtly. What's the situation, Morrison? Bad. Worse than bad. Morrison's image flickered, interference crackling through the transmission. The architects, they're not just random raiders, Marcus. We've decoded some of their transmissions. They're gardeners. Gardeners? They seed civilizations, let them grow to a certain point, then harvest them. The consciousness, the innovation, the creativity, they take it all and move on to the next crop. We're not the first, Marcus. We won't be the last. Thorne felt something cold settle in his stomach. How long do we have? Morrison's laugh was hollow, broken. They're moving on Earth now. 3 construct ships, each the size of Manhattan. Our entire defense grid lasted 12 minutes. The bridge crew exchanged glances, the weight of extinction settling on their shoulders like a shroud. Earth, humanity's birthworld, their cultural heart, their home, was about to become another red marker on the tactical display. "There's something else," Morrison continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. Deep space sensors picked up something in the void beyond Pluto. Something old. Ancient. The energy signature doesn't match anything in our databases, but... But what? Thorne leaned forward, sensing something crucial in Morrison's hesitation. But it's heading toward Earth. And Marcus. It's not architect tech. The transmission cut out, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Thorne stared at the empty hologram, his mind racing. Something ancient, moving toward Earth while the architects harvested humanity's birthworld. Coincidence? In his 40 years of military service, Thorne had learned that coincidences were usually anything but. "Chen," he said finally, "plot a course for the Sol system. Maximum burn." "Sir." Chen's eyes widened. "That's a death sentence. The architects will detect us long before we reach Earth." Thorne smiled grimly. "Lieutenant Commander, we're already dead. We just haven't stopped breathing yet. But if there's even a chance that something out there can level the playing field." He turned to address the entire bridge crew. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're going home. Not to die, though we probably will, but to bear witness. To see what happens when gods fight gods." The Vengeance shuddered as her engine spooled up to full power, pressing the crew back into their seats. As they accelerated toward humanity's final hour, Thorne couldn't shake the feeling that they were racing toward something far more significant than their own extinction. 3 days into their journey, everything changed. The first sign was the dreams. Not just Thorne's, everyone aboard the Vengeance began experiencing the same vivid, impossible visions. Cities of crystal and song, floating in the void between galaxies. Beings of pure energy, locked in eternal conflict with entities of living shadow. And always, always, the sound of something vast awakening from eons of slumber. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the ship's xenobiologist, was the first to make the connection. She burst onto the bridge during the night shift, her dark hair disheveled, her eyes wide with excitement and terror. "Admiral," she gasped, clutching a data pad to her chest. "The dreams, they're not dreams. They're memories. Neural echoes transmitted across space by quantum entanglement." Thorne, who'd been catching a few hours of uneasy sleep in his command chair, sat up sharply. "Explain." "The energy signature Morrison mentioned, it's not a ship, sir. It's a mind. A consciousness so vast that its thoughts create gravitational distortions. And it's been asleep for. God, Admiral, it's been dormant for millions of years." "Dormant until now?" Chen asked from her station. Vasquez nodded frantically. "The architects harvesting, it's not just about collecting consciousness. They're feeding on it, growing stronger with each civilization they consume. But there's a threshold, a point where their psychic emanations become strong enough to penetrate the deep void and wake things that have been sleeping since before Earth's sun was born." The implications hit Thorne like a physical blow. "You're saying the architects accidentally woke up something that's been sleeping in space?" "Not something, sir. Someone. The dreams, they show battles across the galaxy. Ancient wars between civilizations that make our technology look like stone knives and bearskins. And the architects, they were there. They were the enemy then, just as they are now." Suddenly, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. Rodriguez's hands flew over his tactical console, his face pale in the red emergency lighting. "Contact. Multiple contacts, bearing 27 Mark IV. It's. Jesus Christ, it's the entire Architect Harvest fleet." On the main screen, space itself seemed to writhe and twist as massive shapes emerged from dimensional folds. The Architect constructs were things of terrible beauty, organic curves married to crystalline geometries, pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that hurt to look at directly. Each one was a city-sized nightmare, bristling with weapons that could crack planets. But they weren't moving toward the vengeance. They were fleeing. "Admiral," Park's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm receiving a transmission. It's not from the architects." The voice that filled the bridge was ancient beyond measure, each word carrying the weight of eons. It spoke in no human language, yet every person aboard understood it perfectly, the meaning bypassing their ears and speaking directly to their minds. "The gardeners wake the sleeper. The cycle breaks. The harvest ends." Space beyond the architect fleet began to change. Reality twisted, folded in on itself, and from the resulting wound in the fabric of existence emerged something that defied description. It was massive beyond comprehension, not ship-like but organic, a living mountain of crystalline flesh and thought patterns made manifest. Where the architects were elegant in their alienness, this being was raw power given form. The first architect construct that tried to flee was caught by a tendril of living energy. The tendril touched the construct's hull, and the massive ship simply unmade itself. Not destroyed, not exploded, it ceased to exist, as if reality had decided it had never been there in the first place. Holy Mother of... Rodriguez breathed, his tactical readouts going haywire as they tried to process what they were witnessing. The ancient being, for being was the only word that fit, spoke again, its voice causing the Vengeance's hull to vibrate like a struck bell. "Small warriors of the young world. You have witnessed the awakening. Bear witness to the reckoning." What followed could barely be called a battle. It was more like watching a god discipline unruly children. The architect fleet, which had terrorized humanity for months, was systematically dismantled by the ancient entity. Not with weapons in any conventional sense, but with pure will made manifest. Constructs that had seemed invincible were reduced to component atoms with a thought. But the architects weren't defenseless. As their number dwindled, the surviving constructs began to merge, their separate consciousnesses joining into a collective entity that blazed with stolen human thoughts and creativity. The merged construct fought back, lashing out with beams of concentrated harvested consciousness that could rewrite matter at the quantum level. The space around Earth became a battlefield between titans, where physics bent and reality rewrote itself moment by moment. The Vengeance rode the shockwaves, her hull groaning under stresses that should have torn her apart. But somehow, impossibly, the ancient being was shielding them, not out of kindness, but because Thorne suddenly understood they were meant to witness this. To remember. To carry the tale back to what remained of humanity. The battle raged for hours that felt like eternities. When it finally ended, the architect collective lay broken and drifting, its stolen consciousness freed to dissipate back into the cosmic background radiation. The ancient being hung in space like a living constellation, its attention turning toward the small human ship that had watched the entire confrontation. "The cycle is broken," it said, and Thorne felt the weight of countless civilizations in those words. "The gardeners are ended. But others will come. Others always come. The small warriors must grow strong. Must remember. Must prepare." "Wait," Thorne found himself saying, stepping forward though he knew the being couldn't see him. Who were they? Who were the architects? Survivors of the first harvest. Children who learned to become the gardener rather than the garden. But in becoming the harvester, they forgot what they once protected. The voice carried infinite sadness. "They were once like you. Young. Defiant. Unwilling to accept extinction." The ancient being began to fade, its massive form becoming translucent. "I return to the deep sleep. The vigil passes to you, small warriors. Do not become what you fought. Do not let the hunger for survival make you into that which you despise." "How do we prepare?" Thorne called out desperately. "How do we get strong enough to face the next threat?" The being's final words echoed in the sudden silence, "The same way we did, eons ago. Together. Not as predators, but as gardeners of hope. Grow, little humans. Grow wisely. And then it was gone, leaving only empty space and the wreckage of the architect fleet. The journey back to Earth took 2 weeks. 2 weeks of processing what they'd witnessed, of trying to understand the implications of humanity's reprieve. The planet was scarred but alive, the architect harvest had been interrupted before it could be completed. Billions had survived, though billions more had been lost. Thorne stood once again before a viewport, this time looking down at Earth's blue-white marble surface. The reconstruction had already begun. Humanity, as always, proved remarkably resilient in the face of catastrophe. Admiral Chen approached, carrying a data pad. The preliminary reports from the other surviving colonies. They're all reporting the same thing, people remembering things that aren't their memories. Knowledge. Technology. It's like the freed consciousness from the architect harvest is finding new homes. Thorne nodded slowly. In the days since the battle, he'd felt it too, flashes of insight, understanding of concepts that should have been beyond human comprehension. The dreams had changed as well, no longer showing ancient battles but possibilities. Futures where humanity reached beyond the stars not as conquerors but as cultivators, helping young civilizations grow instead of consuming them. There's something else, sir, Chen continued. Deep space monitoring stations are picking up signals. Weak ones, scattered across the galaxy. It's like other civilizations are waking up. Others who survived previous harvests and went into hiding. Thorne smiled grimly. The ancient being said others would come. It didn't say we'd face them alone. He turned away from the viewport, facing his crew, his family, forged in the crucible of near extinction. Chen, send a message to Fleet Command. Tell them we're forming a new kind of military. Not one designed to destroy, but to protect. To nurture. To ensure that when the next gardeners come calling, they'll find not a defenseless garden, but a community of gardeners ready to tend the galaxy together. And if they ask what to call this new organization? Chen asked. Thorne considered for a moment, remembering the ancient being's words, the weight of responsibility in its voice. The Vigil, he said finally. We're the new Vigil. And we'll make sure that no civilization faces the harvest alone ever again. As the Vengeance settled into Earth orbit, her crew already planning humanity's next chapter, Admiral Marcus Thorne couldn't help but feel that their greatest victory wasn't surviving the architects, it was learning to survive them without becoming them. The cycle was broken, but the real work was just beginning. In the depths of space, ancient minds stirred with approval. The young species had learned the most important lesson of all, that strength without wisdom was just another form of extinction waiting to happen. The vigil would continue, and perhaps this time, it would last long enough to see the garden truly bloom. The harvest was over. The growing had just begun.